So, you know that saying, crisis reveals character? It's not true. You know what crisis reveals? Crisis reveals the thing that it reveals in the moment, which is sometimes people who have an extra amount of adrenaline pumping through them. It will reveal what that person is like with some extra adrenaline pumping through them. Sometimes crisis reveals a person's character, and sometimes crisis reveals what happens to that person in crisis, which may or may not be their character, but all of the cliches like crisis reveals character, they're very difficult for me. And I came across it, or at least a version of what we might expect from it, as I was reading through Parshat Shlach Lekha, which you've already heard two beautiful drashot on, so you're going to get a quick third one. The story, as you heard this morning already, is that God is interested in the Israelites scouting out the land. Moses sends a group to do so. They come back, and at least 10 of them are, let's just say, scared or deeply fearful of what that land, Israel, holds for them. Everything they see or seem to experience increases their level of fear. The people, the land itself, the size, and even as Caleb and Joshua try to talk them down out of their resistance to the land, they won't have it. And just as they are about to stone Caleb and Joshua to death, this is like a part we quickly breeze over in the Torah reading. The people are really scared. They say that they're scared. Caleb comes forward and says, "We can do this. Don't be scared. It's going to be okay." And they want to stone him to death. And they actually, it's about to happen before God enters the scene and says, well, doesn't say enough, but God enters the scene, Kvod Adonai, God's thickness, and we move on. And the way that we move on is God, once again, because it happens several times in the Torah, God declares God's disgust with the people. God says, once again, to the people and to Moses, "Haven't they seen what I can do?" How is it possible for somebody to see all of these miracles and not just get in line to follow the agenda that I'm putting forward? God is so confused about humanity that God still thinks we will respond to miracles that happen before our eyes by blindly following the source of the miracle. Has that ever been the case? Is witnessing a miracle enough to then step into situations that seem to be ever more dangerous? God can't figure us out because we are unpredictable. We're human. It's what makes us magnificent. And so God says, "I'm done. I'm going to kill all of the people. All of the people, and literally, I will strike them with pestilence and disown them." I feel like just striking them with pestilence will get the message across. "I will make," and then it says to Moses, "I will make of you a nation far more numerous of they." God does like Moses. God wants to stick with Moses. And Moses replies to God, "When the Egyptians from whose midst you brought up this people in your might with your koach, when they hear this news, what do you think they're going to say? They're going to come over to the inhabitants of the land, Canaan, and they're going to say, 'Hey, everybody, this is the God. Don't worry, you're good. You don't have to be fearful of the Israelites. This is the God who brought them out of Egypt, pillar of cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night, but was powerless to bring them all the way to the promised land because, well, they're dead. God has killed them all. What will the Egyptians and their God say about such a God who can't finish the job? They will say it must be because God was powerless to bring that people into the land. Moses says to God, if you don't finish this, people will believe you to be powerless. Do you want to be perceived as a powerless God? And Moses goes on and says, Ve'ata yigdal na koach Adonai. Now, let my God's power be big. Yigdal. Yigdal, interestingly enough, written in the Torah, it has a yud first. Yud is the smallest letter in the Torah. This yud, on this word yigdal, become big, it is bigger than any other yud in the entire Torah. Every scribe writes it that way. I confirmed it looking at the Torah this morning. You just have to look at that yud and another yud. Let God's power be big. As you said, Ka'asher dibarta, Adonai erech hapayim v'rav chesed nose'avon v'fesha v'nakeh lo yinakeh. God, slow to anger, abundant in kindness, abounding in kindness, forgiving iniquity and transgression, not remitting all punishment, not wiping away every sin, in fact, visiting the iniquity of parents upon children, upon the third and fourth generations. God, make yourself big and strong right now by holding true to that which you said to the Israelites after the episode of the golden calf. I am God, abundant in kindness, slow to anger, forgiving iniquity and transgression, but not alleviating people from all of the consequences. Slach na la'avon ha'am hazeh kegodel chastecha. Pray, pardon the iniquity of this people according to your great kindness, as you have done and since you did for the people ever since they left Egypt. And God's response to Moses' plea, Vayomer Adonai, Salachti kidvarecha. When do we sing that piece of liturgy? Kol Nidre. Right after Kol Nidre. Every year on the night of Yom Kippur, we reenact this moment. We are unworthy. We are unworthy, but not of God's love and kindness. We don't deserve God's love and kindness by what we do. We receive it because of who we are in relationship with God. Moses reminds God of who God is in a moment of crisis. Imagine what it means to stand in the breach between God and the Israelite people as God vows once again to destroy them. And Moses very well knows that it is possible. Moses steps in, first appeals to God's vanity. Do you want to be seen as powerless? No. So now is time to increase your power, to show your strength by being who you have said you are in the world and who you have demonstrated yourselves to be. A compassionate, forgiving God who could wipe away an entire population, but chooses not to. Chooses not to. Be compassion with accountability, because God does punish the Israelites in that moment. Those 10 scouts and their entire generation will not step foot in the land because of this episode in the Torah. Only those under the age of 20 will get to fulfill the destiny of the Israelite people to be with Torah and God in a land of their own. Compassion with accountability. Moses reminds God in a crisis of who God actually is. Moses reminds God how to live according to what we see in a verse in Proverbs later on, Tov erech hapayim migibor. It is better to practice restraining one's anger than to display brute force Umoshel berucho meloched ir, ruling one's spirit is better than conquering a city. A midrash on this particular verse wants us to understand it this way. What Moses was saying to God was, Yigdal na koach Adonai legibur shehaya mitgoshesh be'evan shel masit va'avar echad v'ra'aoto. There was a strong man, an already very strong man, exercising on the side of the road. He was lifting a block of stone, a big block of stone. Somebody passed by and said, wow, you are strong. May your strength be enhanced by this exercise you are doing. Strength isn't enough. Exercising the strength that we have over and over and over again allows us to become who we are in the world. The rabbis in this midrash want us to understand Moses saying to God, it's not enough for you to be the most powerful entity that has ever existed in the cosmos. You must exercise that strength on a regular basis, that compassion with accountability, but that compassion, that capacity to forgive. You can't forget who you are simply because you are in a moment of crisis, and the people you thought would be the ones are clearly not going to be the ones. God does not reveal God's self in a moment of crisis. Moses helps God reveal God's true self in a moment of crisis. In other words, we need oftentimes to be reminded of who we actually are at our core. What moderns like to call our authentic selves. In a moment of crisis, when we are feeling deeply scared and uncertain, this, by the way, was a difficult week for many. There's a lot of uncertainty. It feels like crisis. And it's easy in moments of crisis to step away from the ideals, the values, and the vision that many of us would like to see animating a path forward. And in those moments, we cannot stand alone. We must find our Moshe or be somebody else's Moshe and remind one another of who we are meant to be in the world based on how we have demonstrated that before. That's what Moses does for God. That's what I would like us to do for each other. When somebody you love is in crisis, don't expect their character to be revealed, and don't believe that what you see in that very moment is the only thing that's true about who they are. Sometimes a hug and a word of, who are you, really? Slow down, slow to anger. Now, let's move forward together. It can't be that this episode never happened in the Torah. Our history was changed because the scouts could not see the land and the people for what they probably actually were. It changed because of that. But our nature did not, and neither did God's. Shabbat